So the first way is to use NS user default, but that is a bad way to do this, because what if we don't just need to save some text, we want to save some images, we want to save even some videos. That is the bad way to go, because NS user default is just to save the settings or some preferences of the user in that app. And it's a very low performance, okay? And the second way is to use a backend. That is a great idea, but again, it is not the topic of this tutorial. So there comes core data. Core data is an object-oriented kind of database in iOS. So it allows us to save the data permanently in your app. Okay, it means that when you add some more item, then you quit the app, you go back to that, you still saw some item. Okay, it is the app that at the end of this tutorial we can do this. Core data is massive, and this is just the beginning. This is just a slightly introduction to core data, and if you like, you can recommend me to do some more tutorials if you like, and I will do some more tutorials on core data. If you remember, when we create a new single view application, we click the use core data button, and when we click that use core data button, Xcode creates some stuff in core data that later on we will use, and I will explain it to you. But first, let's talk about one of the things that Xcode created for us. It is the data model. Okay, so you can click into the todo.xc data model. Okay, and then here you could see some table, some kind of like table, and here are the basic blocks of core data. The first basic block in core data in your database is an entity. An entity is, if you are familiar with a database, relational database, it corresponds to a table, or in object-oriented world, we call it a class, right? The second thing is an attribute. An attribute is something connected to the entity. Okay, in the database stuff, we have a field in the table, which is an attribute. But in object-oriented world, an attribute is a variable, an instance variable, or a property. The other thing in core data that we have is a relationship. A relationship is a link between multiple entities, or a link between multiple classes. Let's say we have two entities or two classes. One is a company class, the other is a employee class. So that company class may have an entity, and that company may have some properties or some attributes like the name, the age, or something like the net worth or something. Okay, and the employee entity may have something like name, date of birth, male or female, things like that. Okay, and the company has a relationship with an employee, and also an employee has a relationship with a company, right? A company has a too many relationship with a employee, because a company may have many employees. In the other hand, an employee has a 2-1 relationship with a company, right? Because to that company, that employee has only one company. So, but in this tutorial, maybe we will not use that relationship thing. We will use the entity and we will use the attribute. But the relationship is a little more advanced, and it will allow us to create a very complex app. So let's start by going down below. We have an add entity button, and then it will add a new entity for us. I will double click into that entity, and I will change the name of the entity into item. Okay, it should be a singular item, because an entity we have in this app is an item. So what are the attributes in this item? We simply have a name for that item, right? So we will have a name attribute. And the minute that I add a new attribute for an item, Xcode would yell at us. Why is it? Let's see the error. So the error says that we have not specified the type of that attribute. See, core data are like object-oriented things, so it has a type. So we have to specify the type of that attribute. Go over to the type over there, and we will make the name, the type is a string. So that's it for the entity. It just have an item entity, and we have inside the entity we have a name. Very simple. And that data model is kind of like a map or a class definition for that entity. Okay. And let's open to view controller.swift, and we will have to import core data below the import UI kit. So let's import that. And then what we need to change something in here. We'll need to change the var items, the model or the data source for this table view into an array of NS managed object. And I will initialize that to nil. Okay, let's talk about what is a NS managed object. So an NS managed object in core data is like an object, and that is stored in core data. But you can really do very powerful stuff with it. You can think of it as a scratch pad, and it is stored in the core data persistent store. And that scratch pad, you can use it, you can create it, you can edit it, you can save, and you can even delete entity from that scratch pad. Okay, so that's a NS managed object. Now we will have to change two UI table view data source methods. The first one is number of rows in section. We returned items.count. This is still good because we returned the number of NS managed objects. Each NS managed object is actually an item entity, right? So that is still good. But we will have to modify the cell for row at index path. So I will delete that cell.text label, and I will got an item or a managed object in that index path.row. I will let item equals items sub index path.row, and that is an NS managed object. So the way I am going to have that text label is I will use cell.textLabel.text, okay, equals item.value for key, and that in that key is the name. Okay, that is the attribute. It is a string, and I will cast it as string. Okay, I will cast it as string optional. So you can NS manage object. You can access the value from NS manage object as key value pairs, just like very much like a dictionary. Next, we will need to change the add item method, because now we don't use an array of string anymore. So every time we add a new item, we will have to add a new entity, right? So I will change the add item method, and in the let save action completion handler, I will delete the self.items.append, and I will delete the append, and instead of using the add item, I will use a function called save item. Okay, this is a function that we are going to write. It's not a special function in iOS. Now I could go down below and have a mark for helper methods. Here I will specify the save item function or method. That function takes a string of item. Okay. The first thing I am going to do is to get an instance of the app delegate class. Okay, and then I will get a manage object context. It is a instance variable in the manage object in the app delegate. So if we are going to the app delegate.swift, we will see a mark for the core data stack. Here we have many things in core data, but one of the things we are going to use is a manage object context we'll see right below. You see that we have the lazy var manage object context. So every time we got an instance of that, it will instantiate those code for us. Okay, next I will create a new ns manage object, and it is an entity, so I will create a new entity, and I will use the let entity equals ns entity description method class, and that class has the method entity for name. Here I will have to specify the name, which is item with capital I. In manage object context, I will put manage context, okay, and then I will have the item, which is ns manage object. Then I have to specify the entity, which is the above entity, okay, and then I will insert into the manage context, the manage object context. So that's the way we create a new entity, a new item with the entity. Now we got that item. It is an ns manage object, so we can set the value of it using the item.setValue for key. So the value is item, and for key we'll use the what we pass in. I will change it into content because we have item, 2 items in the parameter. So for key could be name because we set the attribute of item is name, right? So if we have another attribute like a time or anything, we can set the key to be that key, that string, okay? So now I would just put some comments over the code. So the first block is we got a new entity, and the entity and the ns manage object, and we set the value for that item. So next step, we want to save it because we got that entity, we got the manage object context. So now we want to save the manage object context back. So to do that, I would have an error, that is an ns error, and then I will use the manage context dot save, and what I need to pass in is the error. So you have to be careful here because the error is here, it takes the address of that error, okay? It's not just the pointer itself, the error, the variable itself. So we have to put the ampersand there, and that manage context.save returns a boolean whether it's successful or not. So if it's not successful, meaning that if not manage context.save, then we will print line the error. Else it's success, then we stay for good. We already saved that into the core data. So we save things in core data, but to do with the UI, we have to append that item into the items array, which is the data source of the table view. So I hope that makes sense for you, the paradigm here. Like we have an array or the core data in the hard drive or something, and we have the arrays, the data source of the table view. So it is very much likely if we have a backend, we also have the backend over the internet, over some server, but over the UI, the table view, we still have that data source. So even if we got a new item, we save it into background, or even we save it over to the server, then we will still have to put it back to our data source. And it's the same if you want to delete it. Okay, if you want to delete it, you have to delete it from the data source, and you want to delete it from the core data. So let's test it out. I will append some new item. So if we did the core data stuff correct, then we quit it, okay, and then we go back to our app. The item should stay in the table view, but we got nothing. Okay, why do we got nothing? Okay, don't be panic because we did everything correctly, but remember that the data source in the view controller of the table view, or whenever you have a new view, it instantiates an empty string of the items. Okay, those items that we got back from the last open of our app, it is stored in core data, but it is stored over the disk. So if we want to have that, we have to fetch it back to the, we have to fetch from the core data to the data source. Okay, I hope that it makes sense. Let's try to do it. So now we have to fetch data from core data to the data source, and I hope that it will make sense later when we do it. So over the viewDidLoad method, I will start to call a function that is to fetch data from core data. So I call it fetch data. Okay, that is a function that I have to write. So I will go over to the bottom over the helper methods, and I will declare that function. So I will write func fetch data. Okay, so this is the way we fetch data from core data. The first thing, as always, we still need to get a manage object context. How are we going to get a manage object context? We have to get an instance of the app delegate. So I will write UI application.shared application.delegate as app delegate, and I got the manage object context from the app delegate dot manage object context. The next thing we want to fetch data is we have to do a fetch request into core data, where to request it what kind of entity or what is it that you want to retrieve from core data. So I go write let's fetch request equals ns fetch request, and we have the entity name. We have to specify it, the item. We are pay attention because lowercase or uppercase does matter. After we got the fetch request, we want to execute the fetch request. And the execute the fetch request is very much like the save method. We still need a var error, which is an ns error question mark, and we will call this function on the manage object context. I will write let's manage object context dot execute fetch request, and I have to pass in the fetch request, and the error is again the address of the error, which is %error. That manage object context dot fetch execute fetch request, it returns an array of ns manage object, but it is returned as any object, so I want to cast it as ns manage object an array. So it can be nil, it is optional, so I could ungrab it by put if let before it. So fetch results now will be an optional array of ns manage object array optional. Okay, so if it is not nil, then we can assign it back to the data source, which is items. So I will write items equals fetch results, or else I will print the error again. So that the way we retrieve data or we fetch data from core data, we need to get a hold of the manage object context from the app delegate. Remember that we can only do that if we check the use core data when we create a new project. And I think that the check to use core data option is only available for the master detail template and a single view application template. So after we got the manage object context, we have a fetch request. After we got the fetch request, we will send the method execute fetch request to the manage object context. That execute fetch request returns an optional array of ns manage object, and we have to unwrap it. If it is not nil, then we want to assign it to our data source, which is items. If it is nil, then we can print out the error. Now let's view and run the project to see. There you go, we got those items. Okay, so let's add another one, and we can put the app into background and quit it, force quit it, to see if it really works. So I put testing, okay, and then I will put it into background, okay, and then I will stop it and so we don't get an error, and then I quit it. Okay, going back, we still have that testing. That's it for today's tutorial. We have made a very simple app to use core data from scratch, and that's the way we use core data. Very simple. We got the manage object context. We create a data model, and we will put data into core data, and then we will fetch data back and use the data source or anything. It depends on your view controller. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me, and I will try to answer as much as possible. If you want to learn more about those tutorials every day, I would please subscribe to this channel. And if you want to make or even a step further, there's a link to the my newsletter list. I have some bonus for you if you fill in your name and your email to be a subscriber. Thank you very much.